Earlier I mentioned a problem of the circle in reasoning by Kant, and this is how he solves it. So we can have both causal determinism and freedom only by admitting that the determinism is constituted only in appearances, phenomena, in the empirical world of sense. Freedom, which is a reality for us as rational beings and intellectual beings, freedom is constituted by a separate realm of freedom and intelligence. This distinction is made possible in Kant only thanks to the idea of freedom. Now remember, the idea of freedom is a notion that we cannot prove, but we must accept if there is to be such thing as morality. If there is no freedom, there is no morality. And so the idea of freedom must be assumed by us. And remember, the idea of freedom cannot be seen in action in the world as such, because everything we see in the world we analyze in terms of prior causes. So it seems that things are determined when we study them in the world, and yet it also seems that when we consider ourselves as agents and free acting people, that we act by freedom. And it's through our own autonomy, or seeing the moral law within ourselves and acting in accordance with it, that we're able to develop within ourselves the notion of the free, not a notion, but actually the goodwill itself. So there are two realms, or two worlds. So he says, first, when we think of ourselves as free, we transfer ourselves into the intelligible world as members, and we know the autonomy of the will together with its consequence, morality. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier, toward the beginning of the course, in the idea that, in fact, we are people of two worlds, and we must say, with morality, we are strange, we are different, because we are not part of this world. We are not part of the causal structure here. So morality is something very special, and we bring morality into the world as we choose to try to bring about what's right and good through the goodwill in the world. But as free, we are members of another realm or world. Then he says, whereas when we think of ourselves as obligated, we consider ourselves as belonging to the world of sense, and yet at the same time to the intelligible world. So we are involved in two worlds. One, a world of morality, which tells us what we ought to do. And there we live, in a sense, as free. And we bring that into the world, into the other world of our everyday experience. And so we are once in both, as he says here. We have one foot in the world of sense, where things don't happen with necessity as they ought to, and we have the other foot in the world of intelligence and morality, where things happen as they ought. So the ought is from the other world, and we bring it into this world and insist that all rational beings, not the non-rational beings like lions and tigers and bears, but we insist that all rational beings are part of that other world, and they should be acting in accordance with the morality of the other world of intelligence here in this world. So we bring morality into this world. Now, how is a categorical imperative possible? How is it possible for us to have this categorical imperative that is a command, an absolute command without any exception? How is that possible for us, that there could be such a thing? Kant says, categorical imperatives are possible because the idea of freedom makes me a member of an intelligible world. Close quote. This is what makes the ought of the categorical imperative an ought of a synthetic a priori proposition. It's there a priori within us. It's not as a result of experience, but it's built into us insofar as we are rational entities. So we have the standpoint of a member of the world of understanding, and we live in these two realities, one of understanding and reason, which yields for us what we ought to do based on true autonomy, true law within our own selves, the law of respect within our own selves. And another sense where heteronomy pulls at us. And heteronomy is where something outside our true selves is trying to control us, and we give over to it. As in when we say that instead of doing what's morally right autonomously within ourselves, following the moral law within ourselves, the law of respect, we lie, steal, cheat, etc. That's heteronomy. It pulls us away. We are weak sometimes. We give in to those temptations, and we do not pay sufficient attention to our true autonomy, truly understanding the morality that is within us and how we ought to act. But because of this, then, morality is possible. If we didn't live in a world where there was freedom, morality would not be possible. But since we live in both, then morality is possible because freedom is possible. How is it possible? Freedom is possible as an idea presupposed by morality that makes us autonomous and able to act as we see fit in accord with our real natures as rational beings. That is, in accordance with the categorical imperative, which says, again, as you've seen for much of your life, we must act in accordance with respect. Do all the people in the world act in accordance with respect? No. Does that mean we're not morally obligated? No, we are morally obligated to act in accordance with the morality of respect, even if others do not, and even if we sometimes fail to do so as well. It still is an absolute obligation through the categorical imperative. It's absolute for its autonomy. So, still, we cannot prove freedom, we only assert its necessary existence, and so too that of an intelligible world. This is how, then, Kant can constitute morality. As Kant puts it, then, quote, the concept of an intelligible world is thus only a point of view which reason sees itself compelled to take outside of appearances in order to think of itself as practical. And what he means by think of itself as practical, he means think of itself as able to act in accordance with autonomy. So this is outside appearances. We don't see this in appearances. But if there exists morality, this kind of thing is presupposed. We must have this freedom that's involved with the other world if we are to be people of action, bringing about moral choices through our own autonomy, our own self-law. So how should we regard freedom, then? Again, for Kant, freedom is a mere idea, whose objective reality can in no way be shown in accordance with the laws of nature, and consequently not in any possible experience. So this means that the reality we see out there is not the totality of reality. It's the reality that is structured in accordance with the structures of the human mind. And the human mind is set up so as to analyze things in terms of causality. And we must step away from that to see ourselves as truly free, that we are not causally determined, but rather we have freedom to choose to act in accordance with our autonomy. Now, here's a further question, though, for Kant. How do we explain our apparent interest or desire to be moral persons on this account? Remember, there can't be anything in it for us. We have to be doing what's right because it's right. So there's not as if there's an eternal cookie or a blessedness in heaven and that sort of thing. We're not doing it because of that, because that would be heteronomy. We'd be doing it for a reward in that case. So in this case, then we have to consider just why is it that people are interested in being moral. If we're to be disinterested followers of our duty for duty's sake, and that means there's nothing special in it for us, but rather we're doing our duty because it is right for us to do our moral duty. That is to do what is right for no other reason than that it is the right thing to do. That is to be duty doers, people who do their moral duty. Why do we want to do what is right and to do what is our duty? So Kant is questioning himself for the opportunity to explain this. For this, Kant confesses that he does not have a complete answer. So philosophy doesn't necessarily answer everything here. So he says the following, quote, consequently, there is for us men no possibility at all of an explanation as to how and why the universality of a maxim as a law, and hence morality, interests us. So we have to be careful here. If it interests us, Are we doing it for some other reason than for the morality for its own sake, moral duty for its own sake? He goes on, this much only is certain. The moral law is valid for us, not because it interests us. Right? Not because there's something in it for us. That's what he means. He goes on, for this is heteronomy, and the dependence of practical reason on sensibility, namely on an underlying feeling, whereby reason could never be morally legislative. So if it's just on the basis of feelings, it couldn't have the absolute character of law, moral law. He goes on, but rather the moral law interests us, and here's the reason, because it is valid for us as men or as human beings, since it is sprung from our will as intelligence, and hence from our proper self. So it comes from our very autonomy, and it's an affirmation of ourselves as moral beings. It has come right out of our will as intelligence, and it is our proper self. So why does it interest us? Because this is a full expression of what we are as rational beings and people who seek to do what is morally right because it is right, and not because someone's going to give us a reward for it. For Kant, then, everything depends on the idea of freedom belonging to a rational being. And it's this idea of freedom which makes morality possible. But how are we drawn to the moral right so as to make this our goal? How can this pure reason of ours from the intelligible world be practical? That is, help us guide us in our right actions and become what dictates morality and obliges us to act as moral persons. How does that work? To this, Kant gives the following reply. To explain this, quote, to explain this is quite beyond the power of human reason, and all the effort and work of seeking such an explanation is wasted. So we have reached the limits of philosophy in this. For this, for Kant, is what he calls, quote, the extreme limit of all moral inquiry. So why do we want to be moral? That's what he's after here. What is the real reason that we want to be moral? And he says here that it is the limit which reason reaches when it has gone as far as it can to establish the foundations of morality, in the view of Kant. So this remains mysterious. All he can say is that it seems to be something that we all desire and that we would seek. Now there's another way to look at this as well, though, and that is that Kant pleads with us here to see that this is the real nature of human beings. Don't you recognize this in yourself? So that's the final plea. Don't you recognize this in yourself? The philosophical problem is that not everybody agrees with Kant, and not everybody sees this in himself or herself. There are people who would steal the Mona Lisa or some other piece of art worth millions of dollars. These people would also kill for that. And there are also people who would kill for $100,000. There are people who would kill for $10,000. There are people who would take away your entire life and treat you with disrespect by killing you for $100. And Kant thinks that if we could only talk to these people and have them think about what they're really constituted as human beings and as rational beings, that they would eventually come to see that what they're doing is the wrong action and come to see what is the right action. But this is his final appeal. So it does not work out perfectly for Kant, but he appeals to you to see within yourselves this morality and this foundation of what's morally right. Of course, this is not the end of philosophy. This is the Kantian viewpoint that puts the notion of intention as primary. So the moral value of any action lies not in the outcome, but in the intention in accordance with which the activity is sought. So the moral value lies in the intention, not in the outcome. And that's the end of Kant. And we'll talk about this a bit more in class. So I'll stop here.